Hello everyone, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Jack and Tu Tien have just saved Mother Loy's warehouse from a forged mortgage agreement. But before their family can enjoy even one peaceful morning, the water flowing to their farm suddenly stops. At the top of the mountain, a new construction project has crushed the community pipeline and redirected the spring that has supplied the village for generations. Children have no water at home. Vegetable fields are drying, and the youngest melon plants may not survive the day. While Jack tries to prevent the angry villagers from taking matters into their own hands, Tu Tien discovers that the contractor moved an official boundary marker to make room for a larger private reservoir. Can they restore the water before the entire village loses its harvest? And when Tu Tien's leadership catches the attention of a major agricultural program in Hanoi, will the greatest opportunity of her life bring her closer to Jack, or force them onto two different roads? Stay with us until the end to discover what happens. And if you believe love means helping someone grow without holding them back, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter of Jack and Tu Tien's journey. The morning began quietly at the family farm in the mountains of northwestern Vietnam. The first delivery truck had already left for Hanoi. Workers were checking the drying bamboo shoots beneath the covered shelter, while Uncle Dung walked between the melon rows with a small notebook in his hand. Mother Lo prepared breakfast beneath the veranda. For the first time in many days, there were no legal documents on the table. There were no police officers, counterfeit products, or strangers threatening to take the warehouse. Jack and Tu Tien sat beside each other with bowls of hot soup. Mother Lo placed more vegetables into Tu Tien's bowl. "You barely ate yesterday." Tu Tien smiled. "I was making sure the final packages were ready." Uncle Dung sat down and laughed. "Our quality director remembers every product code but forgets she needs food." Jack looked at Tu Tien. "I've been telling her the same thing." Tu Tien raised an eyebrow. "You worked through the night, too." "That is different." "How?" Jack thought for a moment. "It is different because I said so." Mother Lo laughed. The peaceful moment lasted only a few seconds. A young worker ran across the yard toward the veranda. "Jack! Tu Tien! There is no water in the irrigation system!" Jack immediately stood. Everyone hurried toward the melon field. The irrigation pipes were completely dry. Uncle Dung checked the electric pump. The pump is still running. He opened the main valve and listened. There is no water entering the line. Tu Tien touched the soil around the youngest melon plants. The morning sun had already begun warming the field. The upper layer of earth was becoming dry and loose. "When did the water stop?" she asked. "Before sunrise," the worker answered. Another villager arrived carrying an empty bucket. Then a young woman named Mai came running from the lower vegetable fields. "Our house has no water," Mai said. "The children used the last clean bucket this morning." Jack looked toward the mountain. "This is not only our farm." More villagers began appearing on the road. Some carried empty containers. Others brought pieces of dry irrigation hose. An elderly farmer named Mr. Cod. Fook walked slowly toward them with an old metal bucket in his hand. "The entire lower village has lost the spring," he said. Jack, Tu Tien, Uncle Dung, and several workers followed the community pipeline uphill. Near the boundary of the upstream property, they found a new metal fence blocking the maintenance path. Behind it, an excavator was digging a large reservoir into the hillside. Fresh red soil covered the slope. A newly opened channel redirected water away from the old village pipeline. Uncle Dung pulled away loose soil and uncovered a crushed section of pipe. Deep marks from heavy machinery ran across the plastic. "This was not broken by pressure," he said. "A machine struck it." Tu Tien examined the ground. The pipe had been damaged in several places, then covered with fresh soil. A site supervisor approached from behind the fence. "This is a private construction area. You need to leave." Jack stepped forward. "This pipeline supplies water to the entire village. The land has a new owner." "The land may be private," Tu Tien said, "but the village pipeline did not suddenly stop existing." The supervisor held up a folded construction permit. "The owner has permission to build an agricultural reservoir." Tu Tien asked to examine the document. The approved plan allowed the collection of excess rainwater in a small pond. It did not authorize the contractor to block the natural spring or destroy the community pipeline. "This permit does not allow what you are doing," she said. The supervisor took the document back. "We are following the owner's instructions." Several villagers became angry. One man lifted a heavy farming tool and pointed toward the excavator. "If they do not stop, we will stop the machine ourselves." Jack moved between the villagers and the fence. "No one touches the equipment. They destroyed our water. I know. Our fields will die. And damaging their machines will give them a reason to accuse the village," Jack said. "We need evidence, not a fight." The man lowered the tool reluctantly. Tu Tien looked toward the dry fields below. "We need two plans." Jack understood immediately. One team restores the pipeline, and another protects the village until the water returns. Jack asked Uncle Dung to inspect the entire pipeline and record every damaged section. He would photograph the construction site and contact the commune irrigation officer. Tu Tien returned to the village with Mother Loai and several workers. The farm's delivery truck was emptied and fitted with two large clean tanks. Workers drove to a public well in a neighboring community. Mother Loai brought out notebooks and began recording how many people lived in each household. Tu Tien established an emergency order of priority. Drinking and cooking water would go first to children, elderly people, and households without private wells. The remaining water would be divided among livestock, newly planted vegetables, and the youngest melon plants. Older crops would receive only enough to slow moisture loss. One farmer became upset. "My entire field needs water." "So does every other field," Tu Tien answered. "If we use everything on one farm, the next family will receive nothing." The farmer looked toward his drying crops. Tu Tien softened her voice. "I cannot promise that every plant will survive perfectly, but if we share carefully, we can protect the people first and keep the most vulnerable crops alive. Han and the younger workers clean containers. Mai helped organize the families waiting for water. The elderly market woman brought her small cart and began delivering filled containers to people who were too old or weak to reach the distribution point. Within an hour, the village square had become an emergency water station. As Tu Tien checked the household list, Jack's phone rang. It was the purchasing manager from the clean food store chain. The latest shipment had arrived safely, but the manager had heard reports that the village was experiencing a serious water problem. "Will the crisis affect your production?" he asked. "It may affect the next harvest," Jack said, "but Tu Tien has already organized emergency water distribution and crop protection." The manager sounded impressed. "She is managing the village response. She is managing the part that keeps people alive while I deal with the broken pipeline." "I would like to speak with her later," the manager said. "Our company is planning a regional program for rural producers. Someone with practical leadership experience may be valuable." Jack looked toward Tu Tien as she carried a bucket to an elderly woman. He did not yet understand how important that conversation would become. Mr. End. Fook had lived in the village for more than 60 years. He remembered when the original pipeline had been installed. Every family contributed something, he explained. Some people gave money. Others carried pipes, dug the trench, or repaired the mountain road. Jack asked, "Was the village's right to use the spring ever written down?" Mr. Fook nodded. "The previous landowner signed an agreement." "Where is it?" "It should be in the old community house." Jack, Tu Tien, Uncle Dung, and Mr. Fook went to the small wooden building near the center of the village. Old farming tools hung from the walls. A locked cabinet contained meeting notes, crop records, tax lists, and irrigation documents collected over many years. The village representative opened the cabinet. Most of the papers were faded and covered in dust. Rather than reading every document, Tu Tien separated them into 3 groups: water records, land boundaries, community agreements. Mr. Fook recognized the thin folder tied with faded string. Inside was an 18-year-old agreement signed by 23 households and the former owner of the upstream property. The document granted the village permanent access to maintain the buried pipeline crossing the edge of the land. The access right would remain valid even if the property was later sold. In exchange, villagers had helped repair the upper road and agreed to maintain the spring channel. Mother Loe's name appeared among the household signatures. Jack read the final paragraph. The new owner cannot legally block the maintenance path. Uncle Dung opened the attached boundary map. A narrow community access strip followed the old pipeline beside a large chestnut tree. Tu Tien compared the map with the modern reservoir permit. The approved pond should have been located north of the access strip. The actual excavation was directly over it. This is enough to stop the work, Jack said. Tu Tien studied both maps again. Only if we can prove where the original boundary begins. The old map used a carved stone beside the chestnut tree as the official reference point. The modern construction plan used a new metal survey post. They returned to the upper property. The large chestnut tree still stood near the fence, but fresh soil surrounded its roots. Uncle Dung and Mr. Phuc carefully cleared the ground. Soon, the top of an old rectangular stone appeared. A faded cross had been carved into its surface. The modern metal post stood farther uphill. Jack measured the distance between them. The new post was more than 12 meters from the official marker. Tu Tien touched the metal post. The paint was still bright and smooth. This was installed recently. She examined the permit photographs stored with the construction application. The original site image showed the chestnut tree and stone marker. There was no metal post. The contractor had added it after the plan was approved. The site supervisor approached. You are not allowed to interfere with the markers. Tu Tien held up the permit photograph. This post did not exist when the boundary was approved. The supervisor looked briefly at the image. That photograph may be old. It was submitted with your own permit application. Jack pointed toward the excavator. You moved the measuring point so the pond could be larger. The supervisor denied it. The position was selected by the survey team. Then show us the survey record, Jack said. The supervisor refused. He ordered the excavator operator to continue working. Fresh soil began falling toward the exposed pipeline. The villagers shouted angrily. Jack raised his hand. Everyone step back. Tu Tien looked at the old stone, the fresh paint, and the permit photograph. They had the 3 pieces they needed. The village's permanent access agreement, the official stone boundary marker, and proof that the metal post had been installed later. Jack called the district land office. Now they needed someone with the authority to stop the machines. Ms. Price. Land from the district land office arrived with the commune irrigation officer shortly before noon. She had recently handled the dispute involving Mother Loe's warehouse and was surprised to find Jack and Tu Tien facing another property conflict. Tu Tien presented the evidence in a clear order. First, the community water agreement. Second, the old map identifying the stone marker. Third, the permit photograph proving the metal survey post was not part of the approved boundary. Miss Land measured the distance herself. The excavation is outside the permitted area. The irrigation officer inspected the crushed pipe. The natural stream and community pipeline must be restored immediately. Miss Land turned toward the supervisor. Stop all machinery. The supervisor hesitated. I need approval from the landowner. You have an official order from the district, Ms. Land said. Stop the work. The excavator finally became silent. A black vehicle appeared on the upper road. It stopped beside the fence. The new landowner stepped out. His name was Mr. Keen, a wealthy agricultural investor who had recently purchased several properties in the district. He wore a dark coat and carried himself with controlled confidence. Why has construction stopped? He asked. Miss Land handed him the permit and the community agreement. Your contractor moved the working boundary, damaged a protected pipeline, and blocked a registered community access path. Mr. Tien looked toward the supervisor. I was told the pipe was abandoned. Mr. Phuc stepped forward with his empty bucket. That pipe gives water to every house and field below this hill. Mr. Tien examined the old agreement. This was not included in the sales documents. Jack watched his reaction carefully. Perhaps the previous owner failed to disclose it. But you saw the villagers arrive this morning. I was told the dispute concerned only your farm. You left without asking anyone, Jack said. Mr. Keen looked toward the dry village below. My reservoir will create jobs and support a modern agricultural project. Tu Tien faced him. A project cannot support a community by taking away the water that keeps the community alive. Mr. Keen's expression remained cold. The village may need to develop another source. A small boy approached the fence carrying an empty plastic bottle. Mai followed behind him. The child looked at the water flowing into the unfinished private pond. "Mother, why can that pond have water when our house does not?" Mai did not know how to answer. One of Mr. Keen's construction workers lowered his eyes. "My parents live in the lower village too," he admitted. "Their well is dry during this season. They depend on the spring." Mr. Keen turned toward him. "You never told me that." No one asked the workers where the water went. Mother Loy stepped forward. She did not speak angrily. "You came here to build something profitable," she said. "There is nothing wrong with that." Mr. Can looked at her. "But no investment should begin by taking away the life of the people already living here." She pointed toward the child's empty bottle. "The water you are collecting in that pond is the same water he needs at home." For the first time, Mr. Ken's expression changed. He looked at the unfinished reservoir, the crushed pipeline, and the villagers carrying empty containers. Then he turned toward the site supervisor. "Did you move the boundary post?" The supervisor denied it again. Tu Tien held up the construction photograph. The approved survey image shows only the stone marker. Uncle Dung scraped the side of the metal post. Fresh paint came away beneath his tool. Miss Lon asked for the purchase and installation record. A worker quietly brought the site file. The receipt showed that the metal post had been purchased 2 weeks after the construction permit was approved. The evidence left little room for denial. The supervisor finally admitted that he had installed the new post. Mr. Bai Keen had requested the largest possible reservoir. The supervisor believed increasing the excavation area would help him complete the project faster and earn a larger payment. Mr. Kyan's voice became hard. "I asked for maximum capacity within the approved land." "You did not say we had to keep the old pipe," the supervisor replied. "I should not have needed to." Miss Lon informed Mr. Keen that the construction would remain suspended until the boundary was resurveyed. The community pipeline had to be repaired immediately. Mr. Kane looked again at the boy with the empty bottle. "How long will the temporary repair take?" Uncle Dung answered. "If we have materials and full access, we can reconnect the water before dark. And a permanent repair? Several days." Mr. Kyan pointed toward the gate. "Open it." The supervisor unlocked the fence. Mr. Kyan ordered his workers to provide tools, replacement pipe, metal connectors, and the small pump from the construction site. Jack did not thank him immediately. Opening the gate is only the first step. Mr. Keen nodded. "I understand. The villagers had regained access, but their youngest crops had only a few hours before the heat caused permanent damage." Jack divided the repair effort into teams. Uncle Dung led the group clearing soil from the old pipeline. Mr. Fook showed the younger workers where the pipe originally crossed the upper property. Mr. Fook, Keen's crew carried replacement sections, pumps, and metal connectors. The villagers remained suspicious of the construction workers. The workers felt uncomfortable under the angry eyes of the people whose water system they had damaged. Jack stood between them. "We can decide who deserves blame after the water returns." He pointed toward the lower fields. "Right now, every minute we spend arguing is another minute those crops remain dry." The groups began working together. At the village square, Tu Tien continued managing emergency water distribution. The truck returned from the neighboring well with 2 tanks. Mai saw that her vegetable field had been allocated less water than she expected. "My plants will not survive with this amount." Tu Tien showed her the distribution record. "Your family has drinking water. This portion is for the youngest vegetable rows. What about the others? We protect the plants most likely to survive." Mai's eyes filled with tears. "That field pays for my children's school books." Tu Tien placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know what it means to watch the work of many months begin disappearing." Mai looked at her. "But if we spread this water across every plant, none of them may receive enough." Tu Tien showed her the plan. The youngest crops would receive water directly around their roots. Older plants would be covered with leaves. straw, and cloth to reduce evaporation. The strongest rows would wait until evening. "We may lose part of the field," Tu Tien said, "but we do not have to lose all of it." Mai wiped her eyes and nodded. Mother Loy organized women and elderly villagers to carry mulch into the fields. Han and several workers built temporary shade frames over newly planted vegetables. The elderly market woman prepared rice, tea, and boiled eggs for the repair teams. At the upper property, Jack and Uncle Dung uncovered the 3 crushed pipe sections. The deepest section lay beneath the edge of the unfinished pond. Instead of sending Jack into an unstable trench, the teams placed long ropes around a flexible replacement pipe. Villagers stood on one side. Construction workers stood on the other. A metal guide panel was lowered into the trench to protect the pipe from the loose soil. Jack and the site supervisor controlled the front end. Uncle Dung directed the pulling teams. "Slowly," he shouted. "Keep it level." The pipe moved toward the old stone channel. It caught against the buried rock. Everyone stopped. Mr. Kien's worker lowered a small pump to remove the muddy water. Jack reached down with a hook tool and tried to free the pipe. The first attempt failed. The afternoon sun moved lower, but the field below remained dry. Uncle Dung called Tu Tien. "The pipe is caught beneath a rock. How long will it take? We are trying again." Tu Tien looked at the youngest melon plants. Their leaves had begun curling inward. She poured the final emergency bucket around the weakest roots. Then she gathered several workers. "We need wet cloth around the stems and more shade over this row." A worker asked, "What happens when the tanks are empty?" Tu Tien looked toward the mountain. "Then we trust the team repairing the pipe." At the trench, Jack changed the plan. Instead of pulling harder, the workers loosened the soil beneath the pipe and used the guide panel as a ramp. Villagers and construction workers took the rope together. Jack raised his hand. On 3. 1. Everyone tightened their grip. 2. Uncle Dung checked the alignment. 3. They pulled. The replacement pipe slid over the buried rock and reached the old channel. The two sides cheered, but the work was not finished. Both ends still had to be connected, sealed, and tested under pressure. For the next hour, no one stopped. The sun was touching the mountain ridge when the final metal connector was tightened. Jack's clothes were covered with mud. Uncle Dung checked every clamp. "Mr. Dong, Keen's workers reduced the flow entering the unfinished reservoir so the repaired pipeline would not receive sudden pressure." Jack called Tu Tien. "We are ready to test it." She placed the phone on speaker. Mother Loy, Mai, Mr. I, Fook, Han, and dozens of villagers gathered beside the lower outlet. Uncle Dung slowly opened the upper valve. For several seconds, the pipe remained silent. Then air moved through it with a deep, hollow sound. Mud appeared at the lower outlet. The first water was dark and weak. Workers directed it into an empty drainage channel. The villagers watched without speaking. Gradually, the water became clearer. Pressure began building. One irrigation nozzle in the melon field shook. A thin stream sprayed from it, then stopped. The child who had carried the empty bottle stared at the nozzle. "Is the water coming back?" Tu Tien knelt beside him. "Wait." A second burst appeared. Then the nozzle released a steady spray. The child shouted, "Water." Another nozzle opened. Then another. A line of water moved across the melon field. The villagers cheered. Mother Loey covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Mai hurried toward her vegetable plot and guided the water into the youngest rows. Mr. Owie. Fook filled his old metal bucket and held it against his chest. 18 years earlier, he had helped carry the original pipeline up the mountain. Now he had lived long enough to see the next generation protect it. Tu Tien did not celebrate immediately. She checked every household connection. She asked the upper farms to keep their valves partially closed until water reached the homes farther below. Only after the final pipe began running did she smile. Jack returned from the mountain after dark. Tu Tien met him beside the wet melon field. He looked exhausted. She touched the mud on his cheek. "You look terrible," Jack smiled. "You should see Uncle Dung. I heard he made everyone pull the pipe 3 times. He enjoyed giving orders. Uncle Dung called from behind them. I can still hear both of you. Tu Tien laughed. Then her expression became serious. No one was hurt? No. You did not climb into the trench? I stayed outside. She looked suspicious, mostly outside. Jack. He smiled and took her hand. We brought the water back without anyone becoming trapped. Tu Tien looked across the field. You did not bring it back alone. Jack followed her gaze. Villagers and construction workers were still carrying tools together. You are right. Mr. Tien approached. He informed the community that his company would pay for the permanent repair, replace the damaged maintenance path, and move the reservoir inside the correct boundary. Miss Minnis, Lan added that the community water agreement would be formally attached to the updated land record so no future owner could claim ignorance. Mr. Keen looked at Mother Loy and the child standing beside her. I should have spoken to the village before beginning this project. Tu Tien answered. You should have. He accepted the criticism. My reservoir will not block the spring again. Jack nodded. That is where rebuilding trust begins. The crisis had not ended because one person defeated another. It ended because the truth was documented, the community stood together, and people who began on opposite sides chose to repair the damage before it became permanent. 2 days later, the permanent repair was underway. The reservoir had been moved farther uphill. A new inspection point allowed villagers to check the flow without entering the private construction area. Stronger pipe sections replaced those crushed by the machinery. The melon field had recovered. Some leaves remained dry around the edges, but the roots were healthy. Mai lost several vegetable rows, yet most of her field survived. That evening, the villagers gathered beside the restored spring. Long wooden tables were placed beneath the trees. Mother Loey prepared rice, chicken, soup, roasted corn, and vegetables with help from Han, Mai, and the elderly market woman. Children played beside the shallow stream. Uncle Dung roasted corn while Mr. Barrett Fock told the younger workers how the original pipeline had been built. Every household carried one section, he said. We had no excavators. We only had ropes, shovels, and people who refused to stop. Jack looked at Tu Tien. That sounds familiar. She smiled. Perhaps this village has always known how to survive. Mai approached with a basket of vegetables from the rows that had been saved. These are for Mother Loy. Mother Loy accepted the basket. You should sell them. We still have enough, Mai said. These survived because everyone shared the water. She turned toward Tu Tien. I was angry when you gave my field less water. I understood. No. I thought you were choosing which families mattered more. Mai looked at the children eating beside the stream. But you were trying to make sure no family lost everything. Tu Tien smiled gently. We all had to accept less so everyone could keep something. Mr. Tien arrived quietly with 2 members of his staff. Some villagers stopped talking. He had brought replacement tools and a written commitment to maintain the access path. Rather than sitting at the main table, he waited near the edge of the gathering. Mother Louie carried a bowl of soup to him. You can stand there and look uncomfortable, she said, or you can sit down and eat. Mr. Keen seemed surprised. After what happened, you are inviting me? I am inviting the man who agreed to repair what his project damaged. She looked directly at him. Do not make me regret it. For the first time he smiled. He joined the table. The village did not suddenly forget what had happened, but the meal created a beginning. During the celebration, the purchasing manager called Tu Tien. He had spoken briefly with Jack during the first day of the crisis and had since heard how Tu Tien organized water distribution without stopping the company's production. The latest shipment passed every inspection, he said. That is good news. Our regional team also reviewed the report about your village. Tu Tien looked toward Jack. What report? Your company maintained food quality standards while helping dozens of households through a water emergency. You organized limited resources, protected vulnerable crops, and prevented conflict. I did not do that alone. I understand. The manager paused. But people noticed the way you led. He reminded her of the rural producer program he had mentioned to Jack. The organization planned to invite small agricultural suppliers from several provinces to Hanoi. They needed someone with practical experience in quality control, production records, and rural crisis management. "We would like your company to participate in the exhibition," he said. Tu Tien smiled. "That would help our farmers reach many new buyers. There's another offer." He wanted Tu Tien personally to lead a 3-month training program in Hanoi. She would help rural producers improve packaging, trace product origins, and meet national food safety standards. Tu Tien became quiet. "You want me to remain in Hanoi for 3 months?" "You could return when the schedule allows, but most of the program will take place in the city." The manager gave her 5 days to decide. When the call ended, Jack studied her face. What happened? "They want the company to attend the agricultural exhibition." Jack smiled. "That is excellent. They also want me to lead a training program." His smile grew. "They should. In Hanoi." He paused. "For how long?" 3 months. The noise of the celebration continued around them. Children laughed. Water flowed over the stones. Mother Loy and Uncle Dung were serving food. But Jack and Tu Tien suddenly felt separated from everyone else. This new problem had no dishonest trader, forged contract, or broken pipeline. It was an opportunity earned through Tien's own ability. That made it impossible to fight and much harder to ignore. The following morning, Tu Tien stood inside the warehouse before the workers arrived. She looked at the inspection table, the production records, and the shelves filled with products carrying the company's name. Only a short time earlier, she had struggled to believe that she belonged beside Jack. Now, a major organization wanted her to teach other producers what she had learned. She should have felt proud. Instead, she felt divided. Jack entered carrying 2 cups of tea. "You left before breakfast." "I could not sleep." "Because of Hanoi?" Tu Tien nodded. "If I accept, I will be gone when the next harvest begins." "The team can manage the harvest. What about quality control?" "Han has been learning. She is not ready to handle everything." "Then you have 5 days to prepare her." Tu Tien looked at him. "You have already decided I should go." "No." "You make it sound very simple." "It is not simple." Jack placed his tea on the table. "I am trying not to make it more difficult because of what I feel." "And what do you feel?" Jack hesitated. "I want you to stay." Tu Tien's expression softened. "Then say that. I want you here when I wake up." He looked toward the house. "I want you at the table with Mother Lo. I want to hear you arguing with Uncle Dung about the harvest records. I want to find you in this warehouse checking the same box 3 times. Despite herself, Tu Tien smiled. "Only 3? Sometimes 4. The smile disappeared slowly. Jack continued, "But I do not want my love to become another fence around you." Tu Tien lowered her eyes. "This farm became my home. Leaving for 3 months does not mean abandoning it. What if the company changes while I am away? It should change. That is what happens when people grow. And what if we change?" Jack did not answer immediately. Outside, water moved steadily through the repaired irrigation pipes. Workers began arriving in the yard. "When I first asked you to stand beside me in this company," Jack said, "I did not mean only when the road kept you close." Tu Tien's eyes filled with emotion. "Do you really want me to go? I want you to make the decision without being afraid that loving me requires you to remain in one place. And if I leave, I will miss you. And if I stay, I will be happy." "That does not help me." Jack smiled sadly. "I know." He took her hand. "There is no dishonest person making this decision for us. No document we can prove false, no plight we can repair. Only a choice. Only your choice." That afternoon, a formal package arrived from Hanoi. Inside were the program schedule, accommodation details, exhibition documents, and a train ticket reserved in Tu Tien's name. Departure was in 5 days. Mother Loy read the invitation slowly, her face filled with pride. "They chose you because you earned it." Uncle Dung said the program could open new markets for every farming family in the area. Han offered to study the quality control records and take responsibility for daily inspections while Tu Tien was away. The workers congratulated her. Tu Tien thanked them, but she still had not accepted. That evening, she placed the train ticket inside the family's wooden memory box. Beside it were the company's first major contract, the proof of Mother Loi's final loan payment, and a small piece of the repaired community pipe. Jack watched from the doorway. "Does placing it in the box mean you are going?" Tu Tien closed the lid. "It means this decision has already become part of our story. But you have not decided. No." A distant train horn echoed through the valley. Tu Tien looked toward the dark mountain road. 5 days remained before departure. She had once spent 2 years waiting and fearing that Jack might never return. Now, she was the one being asked to leave. The farm was safe. The warehouse belonged to the family. The village had water again. For the first time in many weeks, no enemy stood outside their gate. But Jack and Tu Tien now faced something more complicated than an enemy. They faced a future offering them 2 different roads, and neither of them yet knew whether those roads would eventually meet again or carry them farther apart with every passing day.